There's been many critics and observers who have come to the conclusion that Christianity has lost its appeal in a misguided attempt to become more palatable to the tastes and sensibilities of the current day and age. By downplaying and expressing embarrassment about the more culturally abrasive qualities of the Christian faith, churches have been seen as weak, people-pleasing, and irrelevant institutions. It's a place for sentimental grandmas and effeminate men with low testosterone. What can be done to reverse this trend? I suggest that we must look towards the bright spots and success stories to find the answers. Numbers are not important. What really matters is the vigor and zeal with which people are embracing those few corners of Christendom that have not succumbed to the temptation of compromise. The problem with this is that in the face of growing disdain toward cultural relevance, authenticity has become the virtue of highest value, and it's very difficult to counterfeit. It's difficult to escape the paradox that while you may have discovered an obscure branch of Christianity so pure and unchanged by time that it is in complete disharmony with every aspect of modern culture, you have still found this path through online research, and you are only able to join by virtue of the consumerist American freedoms of religion and association. In other words, deep down you know that no matter how long your beard grows, how many Greek, Latin, or Hebrew words you use, or how well you learn to mimic the customs and mannerisms of your new environment, you will always be pretending. Your new religious life is a LARP, a live-action role-playing game. But don't beat yourself up too badly. At the end of the day, it's better to be the hero of a fantasy than an NPC in reality. That's why I have developed the next great advancement in ecclesiastical technology, one little trick that will revolutionize what it means to do church in the 21st century. Or, perhaps as it will be counted someday in the future, the first century of a new church epoch. The path forward is lean in to the LARP, evangelism, or LITTLE for short. This technology can be applied to churches in varying degrees. A prototypical example of this next phase in church history can be seen in the neo-sacramental movement among Protestant churches. Like various return and trad movements, it seeks to recover some of the good that was lost in the progression of enlightenment, rational, empirical, and scientific advancements. The silly superstitions and fears of our ancestors were scrubbed away. The thread that remained of the pagan past was one of one God only and one holy book. But now that we have reduced and documented the truth of the Christian faith to a skeleton of easily accepted propositions, let's go back and search for all the bits of baby that were discarded in the flood of ancient bathwater. Icons, statuary, and a truly mystical Eucharist are good starts. Interior spaces have been improved in many new churches. But architecture and exterior spaces still resemble much of the modern aesthetic. Even if you have a beautiful, traditional cathedral, the signage on the road is probably still rectangular and modern. Instead of a normal sign, why not a statue or an obelisk? The people you want to come will know what it means. But these steps are small potatoes, and they lack the gravitas of a truly ancient religion. Fortunately, by embracing the goodness of LARP, we can create real gravitas, without the need to concern ourselves with true authenticity. We need a very cogent worldview, but it need not be entirely based on historical fact. Historical fact is an anachronistic notion. As an example, we can look toward the resurgence of supposedly ancient Druidical and Norse religions. Modern-day worshippers of gods like Thor or Zeus are in no way representing the historical worship of these gods. What is important is that they collect with other like-minded people and perform rites and rituals to create community. The gods themselves act as a locus of attention, but they could be replaced with anything. This is how LARP religion works. What matters is the consistency. Of course, most LARP communities are gathered around purely fictional worlds, which may or may not contain religions, but they function nonetheless. Christians can be satisfied knowing that they have the benefit of worshiping the true God, and loads of good historical data to draw upon for praxis. We needn't concern ourselves too much of the particulars. They can be reinterpreted for the environment. The difference here is that churches must take charge of the creative interpretation of those elements. Here is where the little project can really shine. First, let's celebrate the true success of the evangelical megachurch model. They may not have excelled in shaping culture, but they have learned loads of useful information about monetization, advertisement, and how to draw a crowd. The problem noted before is that what they are selling is simply a more wholesome version of what is being produced by Hollywood. The virtue of this model is that many of these leaders have already become experts in translating the message of the Christian faith into the parlance of the average consumer. We can shape the Christian message to fit the MCU, the Star Wars universe, Middle-earth, Hogwarts, and even Barbie Land. The problem here is that our culture has become so bland. Ancient gods? No, just technologically advanced aliens. There's a rational explanation for everything. The zest has been pummeled out of life. Nothing spoils the excitement of illicit sex like a discussion about the terms of consent. People are seeking an escape from the bureaucratic nightmare of a world run by HR departments, but the best movie producers insist on an explanation for everything. What happened to the mystery, the awe, the wonder? Rather than creating another sermon series about being at the movies, I think that the vast resources of the church industrial complex can be put to much better use. Let's imagine a new form of Christianity with a very ancient feel. Aesthetics. First, these categories are all about creating a suitable environment for worship. There are no rules. Christian liberty and creativity can be pushed to the extreme. Architecture. Megachurches can be impressive, but simply due to size. It's the biggest bookstore/coffee shop in every neighborhood, maybe with a very stylistic cross on top. It might make a good first impression, but you'd have a hard time describing it after you left. New buildings need to have a feel of the ancient. Don't lean too heavily on any particular tradition. We are forging a new path. But something reminiscent of the pyramids and ziggurats is appropriate. Classical Greece and Rome could be another way to go, but mix it up. Take a column from Athens and a dome from India. One thing that screams authenticity is the primitive look. Rough-hewn stones and hand-formed bricks of mud. Imagine that you are recreating an antediluvian past, but this time Christian. What would the first temple built by Adam and Eve look like? Let your imagination run wild. The design aspects of the buildings can be employed to evoke particular emotions. A narrow and crowded space, such as a corridor with low ceilings, can be used to convey a feeling of humility, and a massive open area can create a feeling of smallness by contrast. The whole experience of the person, from beginning to the end, should be considered in the design and layout of the building. Outdoor spaces can also be quite useful, and a long walk from a parking lot helps people to disengage from the cares of the modern world. Language. This is something that we forget in America. English is not mysterious. This is why people are flocking to churches that practice Greek chant or participate in the Latin Mass. The fact that you can't understand it is a feature, not a bug. The new form of Christianity must embrace an ecclesiastical language. A new one could be created or expanded. After all, Quenya, the Elvish language created by J.R.R. Tolkien, is widely used as a means of lending authenticity to amateur writers. Our stable of biblical scholars could construct a new imagining of a pre-Babel language, then translate the biblical text into it. Or we could embrace one of the many unused historical languages. Akkadian or Sumerian would do quite nicely. Music. The creation of new musical instruments could be quite beneficial. Chanting is good, but since we are freeing ourselves from the strictures of particularly narrow traditions to forge a new path, setting aside the use of such a valuable tool for spiritual communication seems foolish. They could be similar in usage to the stringed instruments and drums of our current day, but instead of using the tempered 12-tone scale of Western music, something more mysterious and exotic could be employed. Clothing. This is one area where intermediate traditions really show their weaknesses. What's so special about the frumpy farm look that the Amish and Mennonites have adopted? People can tell you are weird, but they probably won't want to learn why. Here is where the intersecting of LARPing and cosplay really has an advantage. All church members should be instructed to dress accordingly before coming to worship. Simple robes and sandals could be provided for those visitors who don't meet the dress requirements, but this is an excellent opportunity for worshipers to express their individuality. Authenticity again comes into play. Use of natural products such as wool, linen, and animal skins could be encouraged, but capturing the desired aesthetic is more important. New technology and textiles can be embraced. We just don't want any zippers, sneakers, or logos to be seen. This distracts other worshipers from the experience. Liturgical clothing. For the officiants of services and rituals, a more standardized garb should be employed. Symbolism should be employed generously in this area, but creativity is very important. We don't want to trigger someone with a negative association with an authentic historical tradition. For this reason, I would suggest avoiding anything that too closely resembles the garb of Catholic or Orthodox priesthood, or the typical artistic renditions of the Hebrew high priests. Alternatively, you could embrace the biblical descriptions, but imagine how those words might be interpreted by an ancient Incan culture, or something purely from the realm of fantasy. Exaggerating body proportions is always a good starting point. Stilts would be impressive, or extremely wide shoulders or voluminous sleeves. An emphasis on the rotundity of the priest might be appropriate to distract the American physique. Creativity can run wild, but should be tempered by good taste. Art. Depictions of biblical stories are a classic way to decorate churches. Sadly, in the modern evangelical world, they are relegated to the halls of the children's ministry. But clever aesthetics can be employed to make a stylish and evocative statement about the seriousness of this new type of church. The key to creating artistic depictions that enhance and don't detract from the experience is consistency. Like the language and music, a particular set of culturally appropriate rules and norms should be decided on and applied throughout. What if the biblical stories were depicted in the style of Egyptian hieroglyphs? Or maybe the style of ancient Japan, but give it a twist by importing some elements of African design. Maybe you limit your color palette to only warm organic tones. Or maybe the skin is always green or blue. Whatever creative vision you employ, remember to make it believable. You want people to feel like it's familiar, but something they can't quite place. The mystery will draw them in. Lighting. There's probably no single invention that has caused people to feel more spiritually disconnected than the fluorescent light bulb. Luckily, the advancement in lighting technology has rendered that dreary monstrosity almost obsolete. Modern lighting is very versatile, provided the source is suitably disguised. Safety is important, and nothing puts a damper on a spiritual experience like a fire marshal showing up in his hideous modern garb. While some application of real fire is extremely desirable if possible, the creative possibilities of modern lighting are actually quite well suited to provide an experience that goes beyond what is found in the older traditions. Imagine stained glass windows that can change from week to week, or a fire behind the altar that you could swear is real. More on that later. Or imagine entering a dark, cave-like temple during the middle of the day, only to be greeted by a dark sky full of stars above you. The average megachurch staff is already fluent in the use of such technology, but a more subtle employment of such techniques could be a game changer for churches of the future. Smells. It's for good reason that people are often accused of switching traditions due to the influence of smells and bells. The olfactory senses have been severely ignored in the evangelical megachurches' campaigns to draw people in. Not entirely ignored. I did have the opportunity to experience the signature fragrance piped in through the HVAC system at Stephen Furtick's Elevation Church. It was a pleasant odor reminiscent of fresh-baked cookies with subtle floral notes. Say what you will about his theological ignorance, the man knows how to sell a mood. But these sanitized modern scents are entirely inappropriate for those seeking an authentic experience of worship. Virtually every other religion, and the more ancient forms of Christianity know the truth. Real incense is a must. I am not familiar enough with the particular formulations of incense to know what to keep and what to avoid. Like the other aesthetic elements of the service, some blending of traditional scents that you can't quite put a finger on is best. It creates new associations. Incense is only one layer of scent that could be introduced. By itself, in a room full of freshly showered people, with floors scrubbed with pine glow, the subtle scents will stand out and be enjoyed. But this is not the original, authentic experience. Sweet-smelling smokes and perfumes were employed to cover the other odors of the ecclesiastical experience. The smells of wood fires, burning not only the fat and meat, but the hair and skin and bones of animals. The scent of their waste, and the sour, fetid smell of unwashed human bodies. Some may find these scents too distasteful for the environment they desire to create, but we should have them at our disposal as powerful tools to create an experience of the real. Rituals and practices. This is usually an area where churches diverge quite sharply, but the evangelical megachurches have traditionally been quite good at not majoring in the minors, so this again becomes an area of creative expression. But there are areas that every church must think through. The Lord's Supper. Communion, the Eucharist, the Lord's table or supper. Whatever you call it, it is one of the biblically commanded practices of the Christian church. It's been watered down in many places, even the traditions that take it most seriously. They only give you a tiny piece of bread and maybe a sip of wine. At the very least, the quantity should be increased to a real mouthful of each element. The goal is to create strong associations. How strongly can you associate memory with a crumb of bread? Leavened and unleavened are both used. The decision is up to you, as well as the use of real wine or juice, but I would suggest finding a particular recipe that really stands out. Don't be afraid to introduce unusual flavors. Salt, spice, and bitter herbs are your friends in making this a distinctive experience. In culinary terms, the elements should be considered an amuse-bouche, one memorable bite that you can't get anywhere else. Similarly, the wine should be bold and memorable, strong, if real wine is to be used. Meals. It seems fairly obvious that the feasting aspect of communal meal has disappeared from the life of the church, at least in a liturgical sense. Whether it is paired with the Lord's Supper or used to celebrate a particular holiday, the communal meal should be a regular practice. The evangelical megachurch already uses the lure of free food to draw in visitors, but why not make it an experience they will never forget? Many churches across the South and Midwest will feature a large barbecue pit on a trailer in their parking lot. The taste of meat cooked over wood or charcoal is a primal experience we still enjoy. But think of the value added by expanding this experience to encompass the whole organic experience. Ideally, if permits allow it, live cows or sheep should be slaughtered on site, right before being cooked. While we don't need burnt offerings to atone for sins, we are missing out on the collective meal experience that bound ancient peoples together around the altar. Reviving this practice as a regular part of the liturgical calendar would create great anticipation and bonding within the community. Calendar. Regarding the subject of calendars, setting a new rhythm by which time can be kept will help people to think differently. While you could institute a schedule of feasts and holidays within our current 12-month calendar, the enterprise of starting a new church might be the perfect opportunity to try something new, as every experience that differs from the day-to-day life reinforces the notion that the life of the church is separate and superior. This could mean adopting a 13-month lunar calendar, or celebrating the birth of Christ according to the astrological date described in Revelation 12, Tishri 1 in the Jewish calendar, or September 11th in the Gregorian. This experience could also be expanded to the units of measurement used for minutes and hours. Days could be divided into 10 parts or 13 or any other unit, creating an otherworldly experience any time people enter the church. Baptism, dedication, and confirmation. The biggest divides between churches on baptism are when and how. Yet despite where you stand on the issue of when, there are two natural places where rituals of induction into the community are performed. First is at birth, and if a church does not practice baptism at birth, they usually have a ritual of dedication. The second time is when the person reaches a majority, or when an outsider is brought into the faith. Similarly to those who do not baptize infants, those who do usually have a ritual of confirmation for those reaching adulthood. Rather than argue about when the particular ritual of baptism should be performed, it would be good to acknowledge that rituals are needed at the birth of a child, more for the sake of the parents, and at the age of maturity. This second rite of passage is traditional in almost all cultures. For the women, often centering around the menses, but for the men, it's a community-driven event. Thus, baptism could be used in such a way, especially a baptism of immersion. To enhance the experience, the young man could be held beneath the water until he passes out, and then resuscitated. This would provide greater symbolic resonance with the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ. As for the earlier ritual, circumcision could still be used, not because it is required for salvation, but because it has some benefit, as the Apostle Paul says. Conversely, if the infants are baptized, circumcision could be used as a ritual into manhood. Joseph Campbell writes about this practice being used by the Murngin tribe of Australia. Like most of the other options here, the goal is not to do something because of tradition. Tradition will follow after, but because it's part of a cogent worldview. Consider the pros and cons, the benefits and advantages of each position, and then design your rituals to fit within your system. Be creative and have fun. Ordination. Traditionally, the appointing of priests or other leaders required various forms of anointing: oil with spices, blood, or water mixed with ashes. These can all be great options. These rituals also typically involve the clothing of the new leader in the specific garments, and the public spectacle of this event can be a wonderful time to bind a community together. Beyond the simple rituals themselves, tests and rites of passage can be performed leading up to the ceremony. A fast or vigil, a pilgrimage, or a feat of physical daring like climbing a mountain. While there is nothing sacred about mountains or caves in and of themselves, using these places as a consistent place to send new leaders can create an aura of mystique around the tradition. It is important to present a real challenge, whether it's a journey through the desert, a descent into a pit, or scaling great heights. A physical challenge is just as important to verify the tenacity of the new leader as any test of their mental acuity or spiritual wisdom. This could also be a good opportunity for new leaders to publicly take a lead in preparing animals for communal feasts. Weddings. There are various degrees to which different churches honor the custom of marriage as a spiritual act. Because the experiential aspect of ritual is so vitally needed in our current spiritual climate, weddings should be celebrated as spiritual events, not merely by the incantation of prayers or scripture, but it should be celebrated. This could become another opportunity for the community to feast together. Rather than spending copious amounts of money on DJs and dance halls, parents should embrace the ancient practice of providing animals to be slaughtered for the wedding feast. And to emphasize the spiritual nature of two becoming one, couples should be encouraged to spend their first night of matrimony together privately, but still within the community. Whether a tent or other temporary structure is used, a greater level of community inclusion should be encouraged than simply waving to a car trolling tin cans behind its bumper. While modesty should certainly be a priority, The people who witness your vows should at least be present and included in experiencing the emergence of the new couple from the wedding tent. Rituals like this are especially important to help educate children. Just as they can learn to appreciate the greater cost of sacrifice through witnessing the preparation of animals for feasting, weddings should provide ample opportunity for parents to educate their children on the nature of two people becoming one flesh. Funerals. The area of funerals have long been a source of discomfort for modern-day Christians. We are not prepared for dealing with the dead. All aspects involved in the preparation and burial of the dead should be brought back into the church. Just as the women were prepared to anoint Jesus' body with spices in the tomb, churches should embrace the opportunity provided by physical death to grow closer as a community. The practices of embalming, dressing the dead, crafting their burial shrouds and coffins should all be made into spiritual practices that become a regular part in the life of the church. Churches should design their own traditions to fit the needs of their community, but they shouldn't shy away from the nature of death. Mourners and wailers are described in the Bible, yet we have no formal role for them in our day. Let the musicians and actors in the communities develop new customs and rituals to help people grasp the realities of death. Here is another area where balance is important. While the evangelical impulse to turn funerals for the dead into celebrations of life is a bit gauche, there are some useful elements in the practice. Developing customs and rituals that celebrate the hope of resurrection without downplaying the sadness and seriousness of death will be very beneficial for people who are looking for a well-rounded community. Miscellaneous. The wonderful thing about creating traditions from scratch is that you can make entirely new holidays and customs. Why not create a ritual around the new moon? Paganism is no more. We know God made the moon, so why not celebrate his creation with style? How about a ritual for the creation of the bread and wine? There really is no limit. Instead of waiting for secular holidays like Halloween, let's make new holidays that make our neighbors curious and maybe even a bit jealous. Extending beyond the four walls of the church. The final E in little is, of course, about evangelism. A church community, no matter how well designed, cannot become an island unto itself. Yet how can members engage with those in the outside world without allowing the LARP to collapse? Herein resides the dire consequences of leadership. It will be the fact of outer reality that is revealed to those who rise up through the ranks and join the inner circles of these new communities. The sad truth is that the architects of such environments can never fully live within. They must keep the machinery going. This Christ-like act of self-sacrifice means that the leaders of these future communities will indeed need to interact within the greater world outside. Third-party media can be used to draw attention to the communities, and the classic strategies of evangelicalism can be employed. Books, media, outreach. However, these tools will now be aimed at people who are looking for a fundamentally different experience. Some of the most effective tools can be cryptic, as the high barrier to entry is a feature in these communities. People enjoy the struggle of feeling like they need to persist for a long time to gain entry. Much like the arduous process of catechizing in the Orthodox Church, the sunk cost of a long initiation period weeds out the flaky inquirers, but retains the true believers. This means that a high barrier to entry can be created, either making it difficult to find the way in, or difficult, but not too difficult, to endure till initiation. Lastly, the natural organic growth of such communities will necessitate a broadening into other categories of life. In the initial startup, people may have to straddle the line between real life at work and in the home and their experience in a LARP evangelical church community. But over time, the community will begin to provide more and more of the necessary things people need to stay within the community. LARP farms, LARP manufacturing, LARP economics. Many people have advocated for the creation of a parallel society. So why not make it a little more awesome?